Hi, I'm Stephen J. Abramson. Today is June 3rd, 2010, and I have the privilege of interviewing gifted actor and director Richard Schiff today. We are in North Hollywood, California at the TV Academy headquarters, and this is for the Archive of American Television. Okay. Okay, from the very beginning, what was your name at birth?
I think it was the name I still have, Richard Schiff.
Okay, middle name?
Barry.
Okay. Did you have any nicknames growing up?
No, I don't think I did.
Okay. When were you born?
Although my girlfriend of 9 years called me Ricky, and that was around the time that my niece and nephew were born, so I was Uncle Ricky. But other than that, nothing much.
When were you born?
In 1955, in the end of May.
Okay.
May 27.
Okay. Where were you born?
Bethesda, Maryland, because my father was stationed in the Navy and living down in D.C. area in Falls Church, Virginia. But we moved back to New York when I was 3 months old, so I didn't get to know the area very well. But whenever I'm in D.C., either shooting or nowadays, because I go quite a bit to do some political work, people always see that on my, resume or online or something, and they always go, "Oh, Bethesda, Maryland. I live over here," and I don't know. But I don't know what Bethesda looks like to this day.
So you grew up in New York?
Grew up in New York, yeah, Queens and mostly Manhattan. A lot of time in Brooklyn with my grandfather, and a little bit in the Bronx.
What was your father's name?
Edward.
Okay. And you said he was in the military?
He was a Navy guy, yeah. He was a lieutenant in the Navy.
And your mother's name?
Charlotte.
Okay. And what did she do?
She was a house mom wife until I was about 7. Started to go to work and went to work in the neighborhood. And in our neighborhood was ABC World News. So she got a job there and then moved her way up in that kind of media business. And she ended up at Manhattan Cable Television. And then they sent her Time Life owned that company at the time. They sent her to business school at Columbia, and she came back from that and was the became assistant publisher of People magazine, and then the very first of that genre TV show, the People TV show, which is now Extra and all that nonsense. They were the very first when Phyllis George was the co-host with a guy I don't remember, and I had a summer job as a PA on that show. So she went into media and Time Life and then Time Warner. And
do you think you inherited any traits from your parents?
Well, my father's bald. Although I think we're the only two in the family. My brothers are not, which is why I hate them. No, that's not true. The traits, obviously, yeah, but I don't know what. I think they're both kind of smart, but I think I've separated myself from my family quite significantly in terms of life path and disposition towards things.
How many siblings do you have?
2.
Both brothers?
Yeah.
What are their names?
David and Paul. And they're both actually in the business. So I didn't separate myself that much, but they're on the business side. My younger brother's a producer. My older brother was an agent in all of the big agencies at one point and now is a manager.
So you're the middle child?
Yes, I am, the middle child.
What interested you growing up?
Well, the Yankees. I was very much into baseball and basketball. And I would catch a book every now and then that would send me to a place of exploration, I guess, and a little bit of wonder. And I loved movies when I was young. I loved going to movies, and I got into the habit of going by myself when I got a little older, because I liked the trance that I ended up falling into. I didn't want it broken when I was done. So whenever I went with people, either family or friends or whatever, they'd always go, what did you think? And I didn't want to think about what I thought until hours after it was over, because I just wanted to stay in whatever place the movie put me in. Yeah, I'd say movies was a big interest.
Did you watch any television?
Yeah.
What kind of shows did you like?
Well, every day when I came home from school, a good buffer zone to whatever the rest of the day brought was watching Mr. Ed. So I watched a lot of Mr. Ed on TV. It was the first show on when I came home. And I watched that. And I guess I watched some of the popular shows of the era, but not that often. I guess the Dick Van Dyke Show was on at that time, which I liked. Later on, I would watch the reruns of popular shows. So later on when I was working, and I was always a night owl, so I'd always have nighttime survival jobs like driving a cab at night or proofreading in a law firm I would do. And when I was home and working on a play or whatever I was doing, I'd take a break for an hour and a half and watch 90 straight minutes of Mary Tyler Moore Show, because they would show 3 in a row. And that's when I got into that show. Not so much when it was on originally, although I watched it a little bit then. But there was a Mary Tyler Moore Show cult in New York in those days, and I would because it was just sheer pleasure. I think it stopped a lot of suicides. 3 hours, an hour and a half of just that wonderful comedy. And what was great is that you would see an entire season in about 3 weeks or so, 3 or 4 weeks. So you'd come loop around to the very first show, the last show when they were all hugging, and they were kind of, hugging, they couldn't let go, and they were walking across to the exit. And then you go to the very first show where Mary meets, Lou and the gang and stuff. And the difference I always remember the difference in the characters from the very beginning and how they evolved over time. So it was just, I started to memorize them because I never got tired of them. I thought they were great. But as a kid also, All in the Family was a big show, I remember. Very different kind of comedy, obviously political, and the nature of those characters was pretty fascinating to me. And, not a Brady Bunch guy.
Did any of those shows or the actors in those shows influence you later in your career?
I don't know. I think when I first did comedy, I would study The Honeymooners, and I would study I Love Lucy. So I'd study Lucille Ball, and I just did a movie called The Infidel, where the style of it was very flat, a British comedy, and I commented to the director. I said, "I noticed you're shooting kind of a flat, flat backgrounds around," and and we talked about how comedy works with 4 guys standing there in a row. You don't have to get great depth, and you don't have to get interesting shots, and you don't have to. If the comedy's working, you can just leave the camera on 2 shots and 3 shots and just let it play. And I learned that, from watching the old TV shows. And when I first started out here in L.A., I would get some guest spots on sitcoms and stuff. And the first play I ever did was a comedy, a farce, and that's when I did a lot of studying of Jackie Gleason and the Honeymooners and Lucy and the gang.
So when you were growing up, did you know what you wanted to be when you grew up? When you became an adult?
I still have no idea. I'm still in serious debate. No, because I figured I wasn't quite strong enough and fast enough to play center field for the Yankees, although I'm still working on it. No, I had no idea. I did come, but there were some lawyers in my family, and I did, again, because of movies, I got very interested in Clarence Darrow because of Inherit the Wind, which is still one of my favorite movies ever, and Spencer Tracy playing that part. And and then realized that this was based on a true story, and a lot of his summation and his cross-examination was taken from the actual records from the court. And then my uncle had a book of Clarence Darrow's summations, and I read that book, and he spoke not only eloquently but brilliant use of logic and trapping people in logic, and of course he was a great champion of certain causes like fighting the death penalty and championing the underdog and so on. So for a while I thought I would be this generation's Clarence Darrow, but I have a rough time reading. I read, but I'm really slow, and I couldn't imagine going through law school and reading those tomes of books that don't have verbs in them. And I didn't think I'd make it, so I kind of veered off that course. I was never really that good in school anyway.
Where did you go to high school?
Well, a few places. I went to a private school for a couple of years called Horace Mann, which is a very elite school for very smart, bratty kids up in the Bronx. And when I first went there, you had to wear a tie and cut your hair, which was a bit of a problem. And they also had this tradition. It was very much based on the English, they call public schools, the English, not reform school, the English, elite schools. And so you wore a jacket and tie, and there was a tradition where, and the grades were called forms, first form, second form. So first form is the sixth grade, and the second form is called secondies, would have the honor of living up to the tradition of picking on the firsties. And the way they did that was they had the tacit right to ask to see your comb, because you're supposed to have a comb in your back pocket at all times. So someone would walk up to me and say, "Okay, let me see your comb." And I would go, "No." And they would go, "Let me see your comb." And I would go, "No." I got into more fights in that private school. I was in public school all my life. I got into one fight, and that was with my best friend. I go to private school, and every day I was in a fight. I wasn't a very good fighter, so I lost a lot, which is embarrassing because they're all like pansy-ass kids. But it was a very uncomfortable place for me. I did not like it there.
Were you involved in drama or theater in high school?
No, there was I remember the theater teacher named Mr. Little. It was a Japanese guy with silver hair. But I never went to his class. I didn't take his class. No, I was not interested in theater. I didn't want to get up in front of people. I still really don't. No, I was interested in history. But I left Horace Mann because that was painful, and then I went to Bronx High School of Science, which is the public school for smart kids, and didn't do well there either. I didn't take to waking up early, and I'd be up all night watching old movies. I'd sneak down to the living room and turn on the TV at 2 in the morning and watch my old movies, and I'd never get up for the morning classes. I don't think I ever passed a class that started before 11 o'clock. And it was a big public school with 3,500 kids, and I just didn't take to it much. But I ended up going to night school to get out of high school. And that was my best time in school because all the teachers kind of wanted to be there, and all the students needed to be there because they needed their high school diplomas to get a job, or a lot of immigrants, a lot of second language people, a lot of bums like me. And I formed a triumvirate, best friends with this Pakistani businessman who was going to Columbia Business School based on his business acumen, but had never gone to high school. So he didn't need a college diploma, but needed a high school diploma. And then this Cuban emigre who was a recovering junkie. And for some reason, the three of us became inseparable and best friends. And then I also would help people. I would coach them to pass the tests. So I would, I had a purpose. I would help like entire groups of second language Dominicans or Cubans or Puerto Ricans or whoever. And they were all we had a kind of common purpose there. And it was the first time I kind of understood that community effort, and had a great time at that school.
In that high school, Didn't seem like something that you loved. When you left, did you intend to go to college after high school?
I did, only because I didn't quite know what else to do at the time.
And where did you go?
I went to City College of New York. Very fascinating old place. Was called the Harvard of the Proletariat. Amazing people were teaching there. And, when I was there, Joseph Heller was teaching and Kurt Vonnegut was teaching. And I got into history and had a modern European history teacher named Dante Puzzo, who one of the many books he gave us was The Spanish Civil War, and he says, this is one you have to read because I wrote it. He had fought in the Spanish Civil War. And it was a haven for old lefties, in the McCarthy era from the 50s, and some of them, the older ones, were still left over. I dropped out for a year, was a hippie in Colorado, got to know what this free love thing was all about, which was fun. And then came back to City College and eventually got into the theater department. Kind of backed my way in, took an acting class, was asked to join or auditioned for this professional theater training program, which I didn't even know was there. Happened to be run by a guy named Earl Gister, who had just come from Carnegie Mellon before he went up to the Yale School of Drama to run that. So he was really kind of top of his game kind of guy. Was the president of the League of Professional Training Schools, and we just backed my way into this program. And he brought up all these teachers from Juilliard, and then some old theater people were there who were amazing. People like Herman Shumlin, who directed the original Inherit the Wind on Broadway with Paul Muni, directed the original Grand Hotel on Broadway, directed all of Lillian Hellman's original plays on Broadway. He was like 140 years old, but an amazing guy. And then we had people like Rhea Gaisner from the Open Theater, and we had Robert Macbeth. I had an acting teacher named Macbeth, which I thought was cute. I also had a swimming coach in high school named Mr. Cramp. So there was a theme that was developing there. And he was an amazing guy, and he had founded the New Lafayette Theater in Harlem. And we were up in Harlem, and so we had Israel Hicks, who now runs the Rutgers School, and who had a cousin and a brother who played professional football, so I was very impressed by him. Very tall, very athletic guy. And he would bring in playwrights like Ed Bullins, African-American playwright, and we would, it was the first time that I think we had ever done where some white actors would play black roles, where we had already done black actors playing white roles. And Ed Bullins was kind of upset at that at first, and then appreciated it after a while. Ed Bullins is a very, very prolific and very good playwright, and we were doing his plays for the first time because of his relationship with Israel. So we had really, really good people there, really good theater program there.
You took a hiatus, a break. You were in Colorado. Why did you decide to go back to New York to finish school?
Well, I fell in love in Colorado, and that ended. And so I went back to college just to kind of take another run at it. I never intended to quit forever. I just thought I'd go back and have a little bit more of an emphatic run at it this time around, and went back into the history department and then just found myself taking an acting class out of curiosity and moved in that direction.
So that's the reason that you actually really started your interest in theater, was just out of curiosity? That is because you didn't sound like you had an aspiration
It was completely curiosity. They asked me to audition after I was in an acting class, and the directing class, who was run by Alice Ermley, who was the co-director of the Davis Center, which is the theater program, had said, you should audition for the Davis Center. I said, what is that? And he said, well, it's a professional training program, a 3-year program. And I said, well, I've already been in college a couple of years, and that's kind of, that's a long haul. And he said, well, you should think about it. So my friend, who was a theater, now a roommate, he called himself a theater fag. That's not a derogatory term, but he kind of loved the theater. He was a basketball player, just happened to also love the chorus line. and would play it. As a matter of fact, he and his girlfriend, myself and his girlfriend took him to the chorus line, the original, for his birthday one year, and then the album was playing forever in our apartment. But he taught me a little bit about it, and then when I told him about this, he came up with an audition piece from Jules Feiffer's Little Murders, and I remember looking at it, and I said, all right. So I went and auditioned, which I had never done before. And I was just reading it, really, because I didn't know what to do with it. And so I was reading from this monologue from Little Murders. And every now and then, Alice Ermely and Earl Gister would laugh. And I would literally stop and look up and go, what are you doing? I'm trying to read. And then I would read some more, and they'd laugh again, and I'd completely stop. This would go on. And then when I stopped, Earl's first question was, "Why are you so nervous?" And I said, "Well, I have never done this before, so I don't really know what I'm doing." He said, "Well, why do you want to be an actor?" I said, I don't really think I want to be an actor." He said, "Well, why are you auditioning for this program?" I said, I don't really know. I said, I write, so maybe this will inform that a little bit, but I don't really know that I want to be in this program." So we talked for a little bit more, and then I got a notice saying that I was accepted. And like a year and a half in, Earl became my mentor, and we used to hang out in his office. I would bring him a big tub of really nasty coffee from the cafeteria, and in those days, they'd smoke, and he would smoke, and he'd smoke these Lucky Strikes, and sit in his office drinking coffee and smoking cigarettes and talking about theater, which he was a great source of knowledge and wisdom and stories. And at one point I said, "Why did you let me into this program?" And he said, in all the years that he's been doing it, and he had already been doing it quite a long time at that point, he said, "I have never experienced anyone being quite as honest as you were after the audition." So I thought I'd take a shot. And I wasn't into the acting program so much. I mean, he didn't make actors go up. Like some teachers later would make you go up and work, and he didn't. He would always ask for volunteers, so I never volunteered. But I studied, and I watched, and I was fascinated by it. And there were some, kids from the Performing Arts High School in New York, a lot of them came up to this program. People like Wanda de Jesus, who works to this day in television, Roma Mafia, who's on Nip and Tuck, and many other things, is from that program, and a few others. And so there were some good people there, and I just found it fascinating to study. I was just curious, like, what this acting thing was all about. Mostly because I would go to these movies and, say it was De Niro or Dustin Hoffman or Pacino or whoever was affecting me in those days. And one movie with these actors would be phenomenal and put me in that trance, and and I was blown away by it. And then another movie wouldn't work at all, and I was stumped by that. I was like, well, how is that possible? It's the same actor, it's the same director, or similar. Why does this movie work so profoundly, and this movie doesn't work at all? And so I was really following a curiosity. I just was fascinated by what ingredients put people in a trance and moved you. Because when I was moved, I kind of have a definition of being moved. It's not just getting emotional. It's actually your molecules get pushed around, and it makes you change. It makes you want to do something. It makes you want to do something, and sometimes I was so shaken by what I experienced, and when I started going to plays, I just met Jonathan Pryce in London. I went backstage from his, he was doing a Pinter play, and I went backstage and said, you're one of the reasons why I got into this, because I had seen the Comedians way back then that Mike Nichols directed. I later told that to Mike Nichols. That play and Equus had just opened as well, and I saw Anthony Perkins in that. And those plays would also drive the curiosity. It's like, I was just stunned by how enthralled I was at seeing these plays and these movies. So it was the curiosity that pushed me. I hated to act. I hated it. But I was so curious, and I thought I would direct or I would write or something. And then I just kept going through the program, and, second year, Rhea Gaisner from the Open Theater, she made me act, so I was up there more often. And I started to kind of enjoy it at times. And then third year was Robert Macbeth, and he and I would just smoke cigarettes and we'd talk he would just talk and tell stories. But he said the most amazing tidbit of wisdom that I have ever heard. Because, we had our mostly New York City kids and kids from PA, and they didn't go to Juilliard, so they ended up here. And there were other kids at Yale, and there were other kids. And Robert Macbeth said, look, you have a major disadvantage. You're at City College. We don't even have a theater. We have a classroom and the old convent hall that's being used as our theater. We don't have the fancy stuff. We don't have the costumes. We don't have, the music, although they had great music there. But we didn't have all the bells and whistles. We were a basic program. Said, you're not going to, if the agents come and see you before you get out of school, you're at a major disadvantage. The only thing you have is yourself. And if you bring yourself, you've got the edge. And he said, look at the basketball players. You have a kid who's groomed in Kentucky his entire life because he's 4 inches taller than everybody else to play basketball. But then there's that kid in the playground in New York City or in the Bronx, and that kid brings to the court every bit of his blood and his guts every time he gets on that basketball court, and he's the one that's successful. And that's what he told us. He said, bring every bit of yourself, and that will be your edge. And I never forgot that.
Well, it sounds like from what you told me that you didn't have this drive to be an actor. You sort of you seem to almost wander into it with a very intellectual approach, the curiosity and everything. How did you end up directing theater?
Well, I didn't want to act, and I kind of loved the theater, and I again was curious about how you put all these ingredients together to make great theater, and I started directing in college. And I picked a play that we could get the whole ensemble, our entire class involved in. I had done some reading about the group theater, and I picked a play called Waiting for Lefty by Clifford Odets. Now, that was about the 1935 New York City taxi cab strike. And the old group theater used to use it to incite unions around the Northeast to go on strike. I've seen it since done at other colleges, and they do a kind of what do you call it? What's that word? Nostalgic look at it. Use old Woody Guthrie music and all these Union songs. I did not do that at all. I threw the audience right into it, surrounding them with these actors who were on a spontaneous strike, and all of us, we were all working class kids. So many of us were working. I mean, one of our actors was working for the post office, and a number of us were driving a cab already. And we all got that play from its core. And as a matter of fact, the very first night, it snowed about 1.5 inches in New York. And then President Marshak of the college decided as a preemptive strike to close the school on my opening night. And the stage manager called me. I was home and said, school closed, so the actors were sent home. And I said, I'm sorry, what? No, call them all back. I mean, this is opening night. We got people coming from off campus. This is opening night. It's 1 inch of snow. Get them all back. So we'd all came back to the campus, and the security guards and the janitors would say, there's no school. And we'd say, no, we're putting on a play. You guys should come, because they were the only ones on campus. So we waited for the guy from the post office, James Donahue. Took him about 40 minutes after curtain time to make it back from way out in Brooklyn. I was learning his lines as he flew into the door. And we went ahead and did it for mostly janitors and security guards, all blue-collar guys. And they gave us a standing ovation when we were done. And, they talked about it for months and months and months. It was quite an experience. So I got it. It was a way, directing was a way for me to include people that I liked and find projects for us and create some theater. So when I got out of school, I auditioned. The very first play I auditioned, I only went because my girlfriend was auditioning out in Brooklyn, the Masonic Temple, a play called Blues for Mr. Charlie by James Baldwin, which we had done in college. And I had played one of the lead white roles from Whitetown, a guy named Parnell, who was the town liberal. Great play. I mean, just a fantastic play. And then here, I had read for one of the townies because the leads were cast, and then the director said, why don't you read for Lyle, who was the guy who committed the murder. It was about Emmett Till, based on the Emmett Till case, the first white man to be brought to trial for killing a black kid in the South, in Mississippi, in 1954 maybe. And so I then read for Lyle, and he cast me as the lead. So I played the southern redneck murderer, and it was a paying gig. It was my first audition, and my girlfriend was in it as well. And then I didn't act again for 10 years.
After college, did you see yourself making a living as a director?
I never saw myself making a living. I thought I'd be driving a cab and doing survival work the rest of my life. It didn't occur to me.
Did you have any aspirations outside of theater at that time?
Just, women. No, not really. I wanted to travel. I knew that, and I didn't really think about career. I never thought about career until I conceived a child, and that's when I said, okay, I gotta make some money. But other than that, I could make enough money driving a cab, take 3 months off, and do a play.
What was the role in the Baldwin play? Was that your first professional acting gig?
Yeah, no, I was paying gig. Yeah. $35 a show.
Do you, at that time, or even through your career, is there part of you that has a fear of acting?
Oh God, yeah. No, that's absolutely. I mean, that's the thing of it. Yeah, I would say every time I acted for quite a long time was looking up at Mount Everest, and that play in particular, the first one out in Brooklyn. I got to the theater in Fort Greene at noon to start warming up for an 8 o'clock curtain, which is one of the reasons I didn't think I could do this, because I wouldn't have time to do anything else. Because I literally, and to this day, I mean, I'm going to Broadway next spring, and I did that play already once before, and now it's going to Broadway.
What play?
Tally's Folly, Lanford Wilson, doing it with Robin Wright. I did a one-man show before that went to the West End in London, and I'm there at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, doing my warm-ups and exercises, and go through the script and warm up again. And, it takes that much for me to get to the place where I can start climbing the mountain. I'm just not one of those guys that can have a conversation, off camera, off stage, and then bing, they're doing Death of a Salesman. I think Allison Janney told me that Tony, Australian actor, Anthony LaPaglia, was like that in View from the Bridge when they did it together. My wife is like that, Sheila Kelly. She's like that. Yep, bing. And then she's doing Blanche Dubois, which she did up at the Geary in San Francisco, playing with our son in the playground at 7:15. Picking him up, taking him to the stage, puts on the dress. She's Blanche, not me.
This process you described, preparing, is part of that Is part of that preparation overcoming the fear? Is that part of how you...
Yeah, no, it's getting to that point of adrenaline and relaxation and controlling the nerves, and so that you can use it in the right way. But yeah, it's getting the brain, because there's so many demons in there. You know, there's so many forces pulling you this way and that in my particular brain that it takes all of that work to get everyone talking the same language up there, or putting them to sleep and waking up the ones that are going to help me along. You know, it gets easy. It got easier as time goes on, but I wouldn't even say easier. It just got more. I got used to the process, so I could do the process a little bit quicker than getting there at noon for an 8 o'clock show.
In those early days when you wore your directing hat, what was the most rewarding thing for you about directing?
Well, that very first play I'll never forget. I mean, it was quite a success. I remember getting so overwhelmed with the feeling of triumph, and that I was able to pull 22 actors and myself into this one, you know, communal effort that fused into one line. I mean, we were really all doing the same thing, which I later discovered doesn't happen very often. And I was overwhelmed. I remember going behind the set because I was overwhelmed with tears, because I just felt just good. And when actors are thankful because they've reached a place they didn't think they would reach. I remember there was this woman named Deborah Swanson, who was a little older, and there was a lot of older people at City College. She was already, I think, 29 or 30 at the time, and she had tried her bit at acting and came back here to study again. And people didn't. She was very kind of tight and wound up in a way, and in other projects, in other plays, she was not given the great role. But I gave her the role of Agatha Keller, which Elia Kazan originally played, and she is the one that whips everyone into a frenzy at the end with this very rousing speech. And I gave that role to her because I knew her, and I knew that somewhere in her something was going to click. And she didn't say anything. I gave her the role. About a week before we opened, she came to me crying and kissed me on the cheek and said, "I just realized how important this role is, and I wanted to thank you." And she was phenomenal. Sometimes you show some trust to some people who haven't been given that trust before, and they answer the bell. And that was a great lesson, because she was phenomenal, because she suddenly realized the responsibility of what she was given to do, and didn't want. I never said anything. I said, "Hey, I'm giving you this role. You better step up." I just gave it to her, and she discovered on her own how important that was. And it's a great lesson that people in Hollywood should look into a little bit. When you just trust someone, they'll and you surprise them with your trust, they'll answer it for you. You know, they'll respond.
What was your first television acting job?
I don't know. Oh, I do know. It was, I had done an independent movie, came out to California because a friend, my best friend at the time said, "Hey, you want to move to California?" And I went, "Okay." And I'd gotten divorced from my first wife and had a girlfriend in Belgium, decided to move to California for reasons unknown. And we had this movie, and a casting director named Rick Pagano saw it and called me in, and I think my first audition out here was for a show called Trenchcoat in Paradise. And the guy from the Eagles, Glenn Frey, was the lead, and it had Bruce Dern. It was directed by a woman whose name I can't remember, but she's very good, Martha Coolidge. And I had long hair at the time. I had a long ponytail, and hadn't cut it. And came into audition, and they gave me the part of Mole. But they decided it was going to be a series regular, which I didn't understand what that meant. And they said they were going to make it recurring, so I wouldn't have to go to network. So I didn't know that I was losing serious commas and zeros by that transaction. But I believed that whoever these network people are wouldn't get me. So I said, sure, yeah, let's do that. So they gave me this part, and it was a pilot, and we went and shot it in Hawaii. And it was the part of Mole, who was a nighttime kind of informant who ran a kiosk. And my only instructions were, do not go out in the sun. So for 2 weeks in Hawaii, of which I was free most days, I wasn't allowed to go in the sun. So I stayed in the shade at the hotel and waited for nighttime. That was the first TV gig.
Do you do any commercials?
Never, not one.
By the late 80s, you were doing small roles in TV shows. Did you, at that early time, when you weren't so well known, were the roles similar? Were you typecast even early on for any reason?
No, when you're a so-called character actor, and especially in those days, you would get called in, and there'd be literally every race from ages 9 to 90, because chances are, especially for TV, they haven't quite figured out who the guy was yet. So they were hoping an actor could inform that for them. So no, I was in the alleyway until I cut my ponytail. I died a lot, and I was in the alleyway. And then once I got clean, I got different kinds of roles. And and I was doing a bit of comedy. I did a Murphy Brown, which was, which some people actually still remember. Somebody contacted me because they wanted to develop a show around me. Had never seen The West Wing, but they remembered me from Murphy Brown 15 years ago, or whatever it was. And a few other sitcoms. One, Jeff Garland. Okay, I gave away the punchline, but I did this sitcom about a guy who eats too much from Chicago. And I had just gotten a BMW off of an auction. And a friend of mine said, come to this auction, he knew cars. Help me pick out a car because I don't have any money. Get the BMW. I got the BMW, and it never made it from point A to point B without breaking down. So then I got this job, and of course, every day on the way to work, it would break down, and I'd have to call them, and they'd have to send transpo. And they were really angry with me for that. But I'd get to the set, and because they were already angry with me, and I thought the material was god-awful, dreadful, and I couldn't remember it because it was so bad. I couldn't remember the lines because none of it was like reading Greek. It just wouldn't stick to my brain. It made no sense, and it wasn't funny. And so I couldn't remember the lines. And so the producers were getting angrier and angrier with me because I was always calling transpo to get to work, and I couldn't remember my lines. And anyway, years later, I run into Jeff Garland, and I've seen him from Curb and whatever, and hey, I just want to let you know I love your work. And he goes, Richard. I go, yeah, hi. I just, Richard, you don't remember? I go, remember what? Remember that awful sitcom we did? And I went, no. And he went, you remember so-and-so, whatever it was called? And I had no idea it was him. I did not put it together. I think he was heavier back then. And I blocked it out, or blacked it out, because it was so bad. He wasn't so bad, but the show was so bad. And my experience was that bad. But it turned out that was his, he was a stand-up, and that was his first attempt at having a vehicle as a comedian, his own show. So,
what do you remember about working on Murphy Brown, the ensemble?
Loved
Candice
it.
Bergen. What was that like for you?
Well, Candice was very, very, sweet. The whole ensemble, they were an well-oiled machine, as I found out the good sitcoms were. Everyone was really nice. And I had this one really great scene. And every time I would get to it and people were, responded to it. And, I remember I got applause when I left twice because he shot it twice, which I thought was pretty cool at the time. And it was just a good experience to see funny, talented people. It was written, I can't remember who it was written by, but he was a main Murphy Brown writer at the time. I have to take a break here because of all the coffee.
About that scene.
I was a patient at a shrink's office, and I don't remember the storyline so much except that Murphy, Candice Bergen, storms in at the end because I think something in the storyline where one of her coworkers was told by the shrink something that upset her. So I was what was going on in the shrink's office before she comes in, but they had written an entire scene, and I played someone who had trouble asserting himself. So he was a bit of a stammerer, and so when Murphy Brown comes in, I think I make an attempt to stand up for myself, and they go, no, never mind, or something like that. And then I leave. That's what I remember.
The fact that that was a huge ensemble show, of course, West Wing hadn't happened yet. Was that something attractive to you? Did you think you wanted to be a series regular in a sort of ensemble show?
I never wanted to be a series regular on any show. I love ensemble because of theater. And in some of the movies that I had done already, I got the sense of that feeling on occasion. First movie I did, for sure, because I helped create it, because it was just 3 lead actors, and the 3 of us kind of bonded, and we did some exercises that I kind of offered up in the motel, before each day's work and stuff. And that was pretty good ensemble. But I did not like the idea of doing a series because I really thought that I had a movie career. I did take one show. I did get one pilot of a sitcom that James Burrows created and directed. I think it was the only show that the only pilot he's directed that didn't make it ever. I know that's not true, but it seems like it. I loved working with James Burrows. He's hysterical. There were no stars in this ensemble. And I remember it was early on when I came from New York, and I had done couple of movies, and one was Hoffa. And that casting director called and said, they're asking me for New York actors, and I recommended you. And then my agent at the time called and said, they want to see you. And I forget his name, but the casting director who cast Hoffa had recommended me. And they were down to the wire. They're starting to shoot Monday, and this was Thursday. And they said, give me a list of 10. They said, forget the 10, give me your number 1. So for some reason, he recommended me. So I went in and auditioned and got the role. And then the next thing I know, I got commas and zeros swimming around in my head because I'd never seen that kind of money before in my life because I got a pilot. And then the next day, I'm on the Fox lot hanging around with the other actors, and someone says, I wonder who's not going to be here tomorrow. And I said, what do you mean? I said, well, after the table read, usually somebody gets fired. What are you talking about? Because I'd heard about the table read, and in theater, a table read is you sit around with the director, you read the play, you stop, you ask a question, or you work on something, and then you keep going. I said, what do you mean? So how can you get fired when you're working? And she said, oh, no, this is not the way we do table reads in television. And as he said that, I saw a parade of suits coming around the corner of the soundstage. and going into my soundstage. I go, what are they doing? Well, all these people come and watch the reading. And I said, why? And all of a sudden, my nerves were like this, and we got through. No one got fired, thank God. But we got through this stage reading, and all of a sudden, this is another world, because there were 50 people, all of whom apparently had jobs. They weren't just people they found off the street. They actually had jobs. Nowadays, there'd be 2 because they can't afford 50 people. But in those days, they could afford 50 people, so they had 50 people telling each other, I guess, giving each other notes or something. I don't quite know. Still don't know what they do. But anyway, we came very close to getting picked up. We did not get picked up. But I loved, James Burrows did a very good job at creating this ensemble. And it was pretty fun. It was security guards in a New York City office building. It was called Insecurity. And I was one of the guards, obviously. And but James Burrows, one night we were doing well, and we had another day's work, and he just said, you know what, we're doing fine. Let's just take a day off, and let me take everybody out to dinner. So he took us all out to dinner, and we just had a blast, and he kind of led the way and then left us so that we would kind of bond even more, all, I'm guessing, calculated. And it was just a very nice gesture of confidence and, smart. And but what I loved about him was he never laughed. He would just sit there and go, "That's not funny," and then you'd do it again, and he goes, "That's funny." And I've always remembered that. He's like, he never laughed, not for 1 second, but that's funny. That's not funny. That was a good experience. But that kind of ensemble is what I love. But I literally did not want to take a TV show, and I took this one called Relativity a couple of years later. Again, a character that they couldn't find an actor for, so I came in, and it was Ed Zwick and Marshall Herskowitz, and I was in a reading group at the time, a bunch of theater people from New York, and someone had picked Death of a Salesman, like a week before this, and gave me the role of Willie Loman. And I immediately went, you're always casting me as the old guy. Can I not play the old guy just once? Even though this was a while ago, and I wasn't an old guy. But I did. The Death of a Salesman has been very close to me forever. I used to listen to the record with Lee J. Cobb, and Dustin Hoffman played the role of Benjamin on the record. I later saw play Willie. And so I put a lot of work into this reading, and I just went, wow, I'm going to have to play this role someday, which I still think I'm going to do. And then this audition comes along, and it's really Willie Loman. It's a younger version of Willie Loman. And I went in, and I completely understood this guy from head to toe and backwards and upside down. And went in, and Ed Zwick and Marshall were like, "Oh my God, no one has brought this to life yet. You're the only one." And so they wanted to cast me, and I said, "Well, I really want to be doing movies right now. So this is a non-essential guy because it's 2 families, and I'm the dysfunctional leader of one of the families. He doesn't have to be in every show. If I get a movie, will you guys let me go, and then I'll feel comfortable taking the show?" They said, we're all movie people here. Jason Katims, who's now writing Parenthood and did Friday Night Lights, was the writer on this show. And they all said, "We're movie people, we get it." Absolutely. And they went, "Well, okay. I mean, I'm not if any movie comes along, but if like an important movie comes along." They went, "You got it." And I went, wow, these guys are cool. So we did this show, and I felt, to this day, my favorite character I've ever played. It's Barry Roth in Relativity. I just was very touched by him. Loved the way he was written, loved the relationships. And they were liking him too, and then, sure enough, from a TV show I did a little before that called High Incident, which, unbeknownst to me, Steven Spielberg was directing. He offered me The Lost World, which is a big movie. And so we've come to this big movie thing. And they didn't want to let me go because it was 3 months. And they said, well, we figured 2 or 3 weeks, but 3 months, you're in every story now. Because I had, that 7 out of 13, 10 out of whatever. And it's like, no, you're in every, we've mapped out, we've arced out the whole season based on you, and the family and the 2 kids are getting married and you got to be there. And it took my wife's agent, Eileen Feldman, who is now my agent many years later. She called Ed and said, it's once in a lifetime to work with Spielberg. You guys did say. And Ed Zwick, to his, unending integrity and credit, he said, yeah, you know what, you're right. We did say that we would let him go. And so they changed their entire story arc. And I went off and did The Lost World, and they wrote me a fantastic Going Away episode. And then Spielberg, on the set of The Lost World, I ran into him in an elevator in Eureka, California, where we were shooting. And he goes, I'm editing, and I'm loving your characters so much, I think I want to keep them alive. And the first thing I thought of was, I got to go back to this TV show. And I said, and I also thought, and this was legitimate, thinking as a director, you want one of your likable characters to get eaten, because then all bets are off, and then you don't know who's next. And he said, you're right. Let me think about it. So then my wife reminded me, was she my wife yet? Yeah, we'd just gotten married. My wife reminded me of how much money I had just thrown away. And so I ran into Steven again, and I said, yeah, I'm rethinking this. And he said, no, you're absolutely right. It says, what a great lesson. No, we're going to give you a hero's death. And everyone's going to go, oh, my God, this guy's dead. What's going to happen next? It's such a great idea. Thank you for that. So I go, all right, well, at least I'll be able to go back to the TV show and fulfill an obligation to Zwick and those guys. And so, they killed me off and gave me a hero's death. And then I went back to the show, and they wrote me this spectacular Christmas episode where he returns to the family, and he's holed up in a little motel room downtown. And it was and Ed Zwick directed that episode. I have never seen it. I don't want to ever see it, because the feeling of that episode was so perfect in terms of how we all worked together. David Conrad played my son. Lisa Edelstein, who is now on, Grey's Anatomy? What was she on? CSI? What? House. She's on House. She's on House. Don't say CSI. She played my 30-year-old lesbian daughter, and I was 40 at the time. But anyway, that was a great ensemble. I mean, David and Adam Goldberg was in it, and Kimberly, who was in the original Parenthood movie?
Yeah,
Williams?
I think so.
She was also in it. And what's his name? Who was really good. Anyway, and Bob Zemeckis' wife at the time, she was in it. Anyway, it was just a really, really fine, well-written, Jason Kadam's really beautiful ensemble. So I love that experience, and I love ensembles. But let me tell you how the Spielberg thing happened, if you have a second.
Why don't we change tape?
Okay, I want to change tape.